Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Business of the Arts. My name is Judy Neal, and today we have some old friends around the table. They are from Bishop Museum, and I'll introduce each of them in a minute. We're going to be talking about another part of the museum that is being renovated over the last few years. You've heard a lot of different shows about projects at the museum. It's a very active place. There's all sorts of stuff going on there. What we're going to be talking about today is now known as Pacific Hall. This would have made a good backyard mystery for Beth Ann Kozlovich. It just occurred to me. What is Pacific Hall, and what did it used to be called? And here to discuss that today, we have DeSoto Brown, historian, Elizabeth Tatar, better known as Betty, who I have down here as the Director of Strategic Initiatives. Right? That's a wonderful title. And it's the last one I would have come up with for you, of course. I would always have thought of you in terms of ethnomusic. I just screwed that whole word up.
Ethnomusicology.
Ethnomusicology, yes. And you're not the first person I've said that wrong in front of. But you were actually
That's why I'm strategic initiative.
Of course. And, of course, Dave Kemble, the senior exhibit designer, whom I've known. Actually, you were one of the first people I met when I worked there back in the 80s.
I remember you well, Judy.
Because I was running around the staircases screaming and shouting. No?
Well, I remember our first dinosaur show you helping with. That's what I remember.
That's what I remember, and it was a lot of fun.
Was that Dorm D?
She was in Dorm D, upstairs with Sukadani.
Where I once called because I had moved my left elbow, and it had immediately poked a hole in the wall.
That's Dorm D.
It was Dorm D, and I remember they called somebody to come and look at it because all this stuff started falling out of the hole. It was very granular. And the man came up and said, well, you know, I could put duct tape on it, but duct tape is pretty much holding the building together, so if you don't mind, we'll just leave it the way it is. I went, okay, fine. Dorm D is no longer there.
It was the oldest building. It was older than the old museum.
Yeah. Yeah. And your offices were, of course, where you were designing all the exhibits. So I went down to see that because I couldn't figure out where you were going to put dinosaurs.
Right.
I had a good time there. But you see, I have the fun of looking back on what I know for most other people was a very difficult time. And just remembering the good things. DeSoto is grinning into the microphone. Okay, where should we start? We can do a recap of the renovations that have been going on. I was given a very nice list here by Brooke Wilson. She had written Hawaiian Hall in 2009, the J. Waddimal Planetarium in 2012, and, of course, Pacific Hall now in production. How long have you been working on Pacific Hall?
Since October of 2009.
Oh, my. That's been your life for a couple of years now?
It's...
That's just the latest phase of our lives.
We had Hawaiian Hall from... we actually started work in late 2004, but our first committee meeting was in January of 2005.
Well, you know, we talk about Pacific Hall is our current phase, but Hawaiian Hall, to the person who walks up and looks at it from the outside, looks like one big old building with the brown cut stone exterior. And it's actually 3 different buildings that were built over a period of over 10 years. And we're finishing up the renovation of that entire complex. And not only does that mean the buildings themselves are renovated and fixed and have new air conditioning and lighting, etc., but all new exhibits have to be put in too. So when we talk about Pacific Hall, that's the ending phase of many stages. We started with the picture gallery, then we did Hawaiian Hall, then we did the entry gallery and the stairway. We also constructed the atrium and put in the elevator, and now finally Pacific Hall will be finished this September, and we're all going to breathe a big sigh of relief.
Now, to kind of get this straight for anybody who goes and visits but hasn't been there in a couple of years, like me, if you're standing on the Great Lawn looking up the hill, the big building right in front of you is this multiple complex.
Correct. We call it the Hawaiian Hall complex because it as I said, consists of 3 separate buildings built all together they're all connected and they look like one building, but they actually were constructed at 3 different times.
Was this planned to last over a period of so many years?
No.
It wasn't.
No.
Well, I don't think we had a plan.
Well, when
as
you're
to-
dealing with an old building, you can lay your plans down, but you always have these unknowns. You don't, most of the time, actually, in the first phase, went to architecture. And that's because the building had termite damage, dry rot, no electrical lines to begin with.
Oh, that's right. Of course.
Yeah,
not.
remember that?
Yeah.
So lighting was a big problem, and you can go on and on. I mean, there were so many problems, unknowns, that there was a constant surprise. And so, it's not cheap either. So,
Well, no. In fact, I remember a show from, years ago. I can't remember when it was, when we were hearing about the renovation of Hawaiian Hall. And just the change in how the power was coming in and what the electric bill had been and how and sustaining historic buildings came into this. There are laws and guidelines on what you can and cannot do.
Well, we also wanted to, as Betty said, there was just sort of basic renovations, but there was also restoration of original features in terms of restoring original finishes, fixing the wood, the metal pillars, which are one of the features of the Hawaiian Hall part. We had to restore a finish that looked similar to their original metallic finish. That all had to be done by hand. That was done by a specialist standing on scaffolding for all 3 floors, stripping off the white paint, which had been painted over these pillars in the 1960s, to get them back to their bare metal and then to restore a finish. So that's just one of the things to take into account, as you said, for a historic building.
But we were very lucky in that we had one of the best, if not the best, locally available architects, and that's Glenn Mason.
And
Glenn
it was Glenn who came on that program.
And Glenn did Hawaiian Hall, and right after that he just jumped into Pacific. Then Polynesian Hall.
Right.
So, and then we had the same committee involved. We just added a whole bunch of archaeologists for Polynesian Hall.
For the
Pacific
content.
Hall.
Yeah,
for
for the
Pacific Hall.
content.
Yeah, for the content.
So you're really talking about 2 different things. You're talking about the architectural space itself and everything that goes into that. And on top of that, you overlay the exhibits.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's what makes it so interesting to me as a designer, is that you're trying to both make the space work as a historic space, but also have the content work within that space. And that's, from my standpoint, was the real challenge.
Boy, was it a challenge.
Can you explain why it was a challenge?
Well, if you were to say, what kind of space do I want to exhibit, Hawaiian culture in, you wouldn't say, oh, I know, the Victorian Hall. That isn't what you would naturally would think of. And yet, in fact, I was worried because the hall, it has a charm, but it's very rigid and formal. And I was worried that, and we had to have, I wanted to open up the windows to let in more light. But you can't do that because the light levels have to be held down to conservation standards, and if you let in light from the windows, it has to be brighter than that in the cases to look like it's lit. Otherwise, it looks dingy.
Would you explain for the benefit of our listeners what the reasons are for the conservation of, keeping bright lights away?
Well, light is damaging to things. It makes things fade. So especially things like featherwork.
So it literally can hurt exhibits.
Oh, yeah.
You lose information, basically.
For example, red, the color red, which was a big thing for me personally in Polynesian Hall. But you have to be very careful about exhibiting red, especially red feathers, because they will fade.
Yeah.
Like the capes.
And yet, red is a very culturally important color.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, what Dave was saying about the hall, we've got this historic building. It has a certain number of cases, and they are all a certain size and shape. And what we had to do was to figure out what is the story we want to tell, given that these cases already exist. We can't change the number of cases or their sizes or dimensions. We have to fit our story into that. And something Dave also has been extremely good at reminding all of us is you have to tell the story using objects. It can't just be words. It can't just be pictures. So the objects have to go into cases that they can fit into. So we had a lot of juggling and a lot of thought to tell the story the way we wanted to tell it, using the objects we've got in the collection and the information we could gather and the images to get them all within this existing structure. And that was true for Hawaiian Hall, and it's extremely true, again, for Pacific Hall.
Okay. But we did have the flexibility of using this space, the whole space, for hanging exhibits, placing them in the middle of the hall, in between alcoves.
And adding AV.
Adding audio visuals. So.
But in Hawaiian Hall, all the cases were there because it had never been renovated. It was still, basically the floor plan is what it was when it was built in 1903.
Now, what we're talking about,
in Pacific Hall. Yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to go back and remind people, when you're imagining this, there were two particular kinds of cases that I recall. There are the big vertical cases that are glass on all sides, the upright cases. And then there are the waist height
rail cases.
Rail cases.
Right.
Oh, that's a perfect name for them. No wonder you call them that.
There you go.
That's what there is.
Right, but they were still intact for the most part. There are a few that had been taken out for different reasons that we put back. And I challenge anyone to go through there and identify which are the new and which are the old, because Bobby Marcos was our cabinet maker who rebuilt the old cases, and they did a wonderful job so that you can't tell which are old and new.
Definitely.
Are they the same wood?
So it's koa wood, but it's not the same.
What,
it's
the
not
rails? They were fir, weren't they?
They're cedar. Interior and koa on the outside. But what I was going to say is Polynesian Hall, or Pacific Hall, was renovated in the 1950s. And it, as a result, it was more challenging than Hawaiian Hall, because Hawaiian Hall, it had more flexibility because it had been renovated. But we decided to put it back more or less to look historic again. And it wasn't put back exactly as it had been, but it was the same.
The feeling is very much the same.
So whale.
No,
so
not
we're talking
Pacific
about
Hall.
Yeah, so we're talking about Hawaiian Hall is the big hall that has the whale in it.
Yes, that's what I thought you were still talking about.
But Pacific Hall is, again, it's gone through a similar process, but as Dave said, Hawaiian Hall did not get renovated substantially. Pacific Hall did get renovated substantially in the 50s. We decided to take it back to an approximation of its original appearance from 1894, not 100% exact, and that meant undoing what was done in the 50s.
And that's the difference.
Restoring some stuff and putting in new stuff.
We actually had to do demolition.
Yeah.
In Hawaiian Hall was renovation, but Polynesian Hall we had to undo what had been done, because they meant well when they did it, but it was not a successful renovation.
No.
But I think what we're doing now is, so what I started to say earlier, if I can get back to it, is that I was worried that by having having the Hawaiian content fit in a Victorian architectural space, that it would feel like a mausoleum sort of a thing, that would feel closed up and dead, behind glass, not a living culture. We wanted to feel like a living culture. So if you go in the hall now, I don't think anybody says, oh, it's dead and behind glass. You don't have that feeling. It feels more like a jewel box. Things kind of glow out and stuff. And so that was the challenge. It's how to make the culture seem alive and current and contemporary, but still be respectful as a historic space. And that was the fundamental challenge for me. And
I think it's something Dave mentioned too, the being able to include audiovisual things now, because the technology has changed. Hawaiian Hall was supposed to have been renovated in the early 1980s, and then that project got stopped because of the lack of funding. Waiting an additional 20 years actually benefited us, even though things got more shabby looking, because when we did finally do the remodeling and renovation, we were able to include, for example, touch screens or video screens. And so now you've got living people on screens talking and saying, this is what we do now. You also have the option of, again, with touch screens, to access additional visual stuff and audio stuff that we couldn't have put in otherwise. And so that, to me, working in the archives department, was very important, because I knew how many images we had, movies and audio recordings, that we could then offer to people through improved technology.
Wow, that's important. By the way, you've been interchanging the names of Polynesian Hall and Pacific Hall. It is now Pacific Hall, yes? I'm just trying to deconfuse anybody who's been listening and wondering.
Right. Well, it's hard for us after so many years of calling it Poly Hall.
Right.
Well, I just thought, for our listeners' sake, you're right. They are calling the same. They are calling the same space by two names.
Correct.
So
correct.
if you were confused, that's all right. We're all confused about that.
We are.
Can I ask, because this is the business of the arts, where did all that money come from?
Well, it mostly came from the state.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I have to say that Hawaiian Hall cost $16.5 million. Million.
Wow.
We thought it was going to cost $6.
Oh.
We thought we could do it in 2 years. Well, wrong.
Right. I just, yeah. Well,
anyway,
I'd forgotten about that part.
It came from the state, and it came from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, from the Kamehameha schools, and from private foundations and private individuals.
Was there any other kind of drive to get public money for it at all?
Yes, we did. We had, but most of it, the individual giving wasn't as great as the state and the
foundations.
Private foundations, yeah.
And I'm sure that they've kept a good eye on it too.
Oh, tell me about. There's so many reports to write. It's not funny.
That's the wonderful thing about being administrator, isn't it?
You know, Judy, if I can just also toss in here, I think for anybody who's a donor, that they want to know that they got their money's worth, as that's what you just alluded to.
Oh, sure.
And there is a comments book in Hawaiian Hall that visitors can write their comments in, and the pages, when they are filled, are given to the archives department where I work to be kept as part of the collection. So I read all of the comments, and I can say that overwhelmingly they are incredibly positive for what visitors, and that when I say visitors, I mean people from Hawaii as well as outside of Hawaii. And we get visitors from all over the world, surprising places that you'd never think of. The positive reactions that people give for the Hawaiian Hall renovation, what they see there, what they learn from it, is really overwhelmingly good. So I can say for the people who gave money, your money was well spent based on what these people have told us they perceive Hawaiian Hall to be.
Well worth it.
The interesting thing there is that before we went into the project, we tried to say, who's the audience? Who is it for? And we had a lot of debates. But in fact, the surveys we've done and things, it's working pretty much equally well for residents, for Native Hawaiians, for tourists, for kids, for adults. Somehow seems to be working well for almost every audience.
Yes.
For all of your constituents.
Yeah,
yes.
so that's
Wow.
almost like it's a gift or something. It just seems like, more than we expected.
Yeah.
That sound you just heard was my jaw dropping.
But
I mean,
you know,
this
also,
really is astonishing. Usually there's at least one group that's complaining.
No, this is, again, across the board. And I think one of the things that really impresses people, since we've been discussing fixing the place up, basically, was it's the content of what they learn and how much they see that they can come back and learn, but also the fact that the structure is beautiful, that this restored Victorian building, which of course is unique worldwide, is so beautiful and impressive when you walk in for the first time, and then as you walk around and look at the exhibits, you gain so much more. So it was a big success in every way.
My goodness. Okay, now what I'd like to do is to move back in time a little bit, a lot actually. The original purpose and theme of Polynesian Hall, this was something very specific.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, in 1894, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, originally there was, when Polynesian Hall was constructed, there was hope of building other buildings to complete a sort of quadrangle. And Polynesian Hall was the first of those additional gallery spaces. So there was going to be a Melanesian Hall, and I believe a Micronesian Hall, or there was going to be...
No, just the Melanesian.
The Melanesian Hall. So there was supposed to be another themed hall. that never came to pass.
Was that to house a specific collection that never came about? Or?
No, they had a collection. They had a collection that started with first of all the Hawaii government collection, and then whatever Charles Reed Bishop collected, and believe it or not, the Queen collected quite a bit, and the King.
Oh.
So yeah, these were all kind of new things that we learned along the way. Anyway, the first director.
Yeah, the first director was active in not only collecting stuff but also to raise money and to get more exhibit space built. Well, for various reasons, again, the additional exhibit spaces were not built, but it was planned that they would be not necessarily a specific collection, but they would focus on an area. So Polynesia is a group of cultures which are related. And it never happened that these other places got built. So Polynesian Hall retained the name Polynesian Hall, even though the exhibitry was not specifically 100% Polynesian.
And it included natural history.
Yes, it sure did, including in one photograph a preserved crocodile who's standing up. Like
and a huge octopus.
And an octopus.
And
was the octopus standing up too?
No, he was hanging. Yeah,
Spread out.
It was hanging from the ceiling. But in any case, it became typically of that sort of Victorian area a bunch of curios. And then
a Tasmanian wolf.
A Tasmanian.
Yeah.
Oh, was there really one?
Yes,
A tiger.
there was.
Tiger.
What happened to
Tasmanian
him?
Tiger.
It's up in zoology.
It's in zoology.
Oh, for heaven's
Looking
sake.
very faded.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
I'm going to interrupt just for a minute to remind our listeners that you are listening to Hawaii Public Radio's Business of the Arts. I'm Judy Neal, and these very active members of the panel today are DeSoto Brown, historian, Elizabeth Tatar, Director of Strategic Initiatives, and Dave Kemble, the Senior Exhibit Designer, all from Bishop Museum. And we're talking about the long process that has led to the current renovation of Pacific Hall. And it really has been very active so far. Let's keep that up.
All right.
That's very exciting. I didn't know about the wolf.
Yeah,
Or you said it
actually
was a tiger.
They call it a Tasmanian tiger. I think it's related
Devil.
to devil.
No. It's a tiger. It's an extinct thing that looked like a
Looks
canine.
like a dog.
Yeah, it looks like a canine.
striped dog.
But it's a marsupial, like a kangaroo.
Yeah.
And it's extinct.
It's very nasty.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
It is there.
It's extinct. No,
We have it in our
the animal
collection.
does live in Tasmania.
No, it's extinct.
It's extinct.
It's extinct.
Are you sure?
It's gone within the last 100 years. It's
Yeah.
gone
Okay.
extinct.
There was one. The last one died in a zoo in the 1930s.
Okay.
We'll organize a tour.
Yeah.
But
But people say it still might be alive, like a Yeti or a
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Anyway.
Moving on.
Yeah.
Actually, I was fascinated by what you said, DeSoto, because that was very Victorian to have all these curios and mementos and memento mori, that sort of thing.
You have to have an ostrich egg to be a good museum.
Well, I think we did.
We had everything.
Yeah.
The museum experience in the Pacific is something else that was pointed out to me as something that would probably enhance the discussion. Collectors went out and went everywhere, didn't they? I mean, they didn't just... I mean, a king and queen can afford to sit still and
Have people
have
do their-
things bring
yeah.
things to you.
Yeah.
But this has always been a scientific organization.
Well, Bishop Museum was very active, particularly before World War II, for expeditions to different parts of the Pacific to gather not only natural but cultural specimens too. So.
But even before, though.
Oh, even before. I mean,
Because,
Alvin Seal was doing it from 1890 something.
No, and what's his name? Young, J.L. Young. But what my point is that when the voyages began happening, the Cook opened it up, right? And then the rest of it, there was an interest among Europeans
Absolutely.
in the Pacific cultures in general,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a demand for certain items.
Absolutely.
And that's how we got the canoe models, because there were two reasons for them. One, as a teaching tool, and as a preserver of knowledge, and three, as a trade item for tourism.
So when we say tourism,
they actually made it, and there's a lot of like the ceremonial quote unquote ads for the Mangarevans in the Cook Islands. They were essentially developed as a tourism item in the 19th century.
right? So there's tourism in the present day sense that we think about it. But as Betty said, from the time of the 1700s, as explorers from Europe traveled through the Pacific, a lot of their motivation was curiosity, was to gather information. And not only did they write things down and do artwork to depict what they saw, but they brought home things that were curios. And as that developed, people of the Pacific began to develop things to trade to them. And so it is from collections like that were gathered early on that some of our finest pieces come, which we will be exhibiting some of in the new Pacific Hall, the Tahitian mourning costume being an outstanding example of that.
The Tahitian mourning costume?
Well, mourning as in mourning for someone who's died, not something you wear in the morning.
A very high-class person who's died.
Yeah.
So you must remember it. We used to have it on display.
Funerary clothing.
Yeah.
Well, it's not so much clothing.
It's a scary-looking thing. It's very huge.
I think it's spectacular. I love it.
And with a big breastplate of very fine mother of pearl and feathers.
Oh my!
Yeah,
it's very formal looking.
Very formal.
Well, it was a part of a whole process it would be worn by a specific person during the mourning for an ali'i who had died. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the few still in existence, and it is going to be displayed in one of the cases that we refer to as a treasure case, because we will be putting treasures in it, and we've done the same thing in Hawaiian Hall. Some of the finer things will be rotated through there.
Well, of course, you have to ask that. Why would the people there let something like this go? How is it that someone from the ship, it was a Captain Cook ship, how could they just be given this or take it? Well, it turns out, and we didn't know this until we did the research, is that they wanted Captain Cook had red feathers from Tonga. The red feathers were so important that, and you use the mourning costume for a reason. It's when it starts, it finishes its pow, you don't need it. So here, you take the mourning costume and you give me all your feathers.
Yeah, and therefore the mourning costume went back to Europe and eventually came to Bishop Museum. And so that this is, I mean, the stories behind, it's not just the why they were created and so forth, but how they were collected and how they got to the museum. That's another part of the whole saga of many of the objects we have.
I was also thinking about the drawings, because the ships carried artists.
Beautiful drawings.
And the museum has some incredible ones.
And they're being exhibited too. That was my function, was to find the imagery, the pictures to go with in a lot of the exhibits. And so I did a lot of searching in the early voyaging artwork that you just mentioned.
Well, I feel so lucky that they had those artists on board, because they didn't have cameras yet, and that was the equivalent.
Yeah. That's right.
Document.
But
absolutely.
Actually, I'd like to get back to what you were saying about the early period in the museum's history, when there was a big emphasis on going out and collecting things in the South Pacific expeditions. And so a lot of what we have is from the early part of the 20th century, when they were trying to document cultures as they were vanishing very quickly. And so the emphasis in the first half of the century was on documenting and the scientific side, and the public side was allowed to sort of atrophy. So the reason we had this hall that was 100 years old that still looked that looked 100 years old is because it had been neglected, because the emphasis had been on the scientific side of the museum, not the public side for that period.
Yeah, the story of Bishop Museum of itself is interesting in that, as Dave just said, there's a period of very strong emphasis on research and gathering of collections. And by the 1950s, we got a new director in the early 1950s, Dr. Alexander Spohr. He shifted to being more aware of getting people to come to the museum. So there was a very active promotion of, let's get the public interested. Let's
the visitor experience.
We'll have the visitor experience. We'll have changing exhibits. And that's when the renovations that we've been talking about took place of some of the interior spaces, because Victorianism was very out of style then, and he wanted to show the museum was modern and changing. And so some of the smaller galleries got changed, such as what we now call Pacific Hall, renovated in the middle 1950s to look up to date. And the planetarium was constructed in 1960-61.
Now, I have a little note here that talks about those 1950 renovations and the tactics that were used. And one of the things listed here is bleached koa beams.
Yes.
Yeah.
They bleached the koa, or they found koa that...
No, you
couldn't tell it was koa. It looks like I don't know, like maple or something. It was all bleached. And they took out all the old koa cases.
Oh, my
and
goodness.
made drop ceilings with sort of a redwood egg crate and stuff. And they made these 1950s looking cases, but they also made a very formal rectangular hall asymmetric. They tilted the whole interior well off angle, off square. So there was things that they were trying to make it look modern.
Right.
And
how could they do that?
Change.
Very easily, because again, as I said, they wanted, and it was a sensible, pragmatic decision at the time. We don't want people to say Victorian, Bishop Museum, old-fashioned, never changes. We want it to look up to date. And that's what they did. And in the vestibule gallery, which is now called the Long Gallery, they installed nice modern linoleum flooring and fluorescent lights.
Oh my goodness!
And again, it was the same. It was the same idea to make it look modern.
The same period as my condo.
Exactly.
Which had the avocado refrigerator.
Oh, that's a
and the
little bit
shag
later,
rug.
but we did. Excuse
We had
me.
green shag
we
rug.
had green shag rug in Polynesian Hall, now Pacific Hall, and alas, that's gone.
No, but that
Aw.
green shag came in special.
I know, but that was 70s.
But we
That's
can tell about the
78.
floor actually, because that's the interesting story.
Yeah.
We looked at what the floor, because it had a green shag carpet, but under the green shag carpet was a linoleum, and under that was original tile work. There had been a tile floor in Pacific Hall, Polynesian Hall. And so we tried to see if we could do a restoration of the tile work, but it had been damaged pretty badly. So we only did the entry foyer has that tile work, and you can see what it looked like. It was yellow and black and sort of quite, I don't know, looks like a New York hotel lobby or something to me. It has
But that whole complex was very modern for its time. For the 1890s, I mean, it was astonishingly large, modern for the city of Honolulu and for the territory of Hawaii, or the Republic of Hawaii it had been before that. It was one of the biggest things. I mean, it was a huge feature of the entire Hawaiian Islands because it was so up to date, because it was such an impressive structure.
So the museum itself, in and of itself, is a reflection of the whole progress of the city in a way.
absolutely.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Of
I've never thought
Hawaii.
of it like that
Yeah.
before, but you're right.
Yeah.
It's 124 years old, so I've seen a
And
lot
Bishop
of change.
Hall had was it the first? No, the second electrical lights.
Yeah.
Oh, I can believe
The
that.
palace was the first.
Yes,
yeah.
I can believe that. So yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And when
And
you
the
consider
elevator was one of the first elevators.
One of the first elevators, yeah.
yeah. So this is.
Where is the first elevator?
Are you talking about the elevator in Konia?
in Konia Hall.
Yeah, that's from the night that was opened in 1924, and unfortunately, the technology that it uses is unfixable, so it hasn't functioned for a long time. But we don't need to talk about that. part.
We're getting astray.
Yeah, we're getting astray. Let's not
But
talk about that.
I did want to talk about the floor, though, because what we now have at the floor, we took out the green shag carpet, and most of the hall now has a blue kind of, the Pacific.
Pacific blue carpeting.
But
Yeah.
the middle of the main floor of the hall now has a floor map of the Pacific, and it is done. It's marquetry, they call it. It's inlaid wood. It's not. It's you couldn't have done. It's little islands in the Pacific and type and things, all done with 4 different kinds of wood to have contrast and stuff. So there's a floor map that you can walk across, but it's because of the laser technology that they're able to make these extremely tight-fitting, beautiful wood interlocking pieces. So we have a giant map of the Pacific done in wood on the floor of the new renovated
Maybe
hall.
it's a good time to bring in that. The exhibit designer is Ralph Applebaum Associates from New York. They also were the designers for Hawaiian Hall.
Oh, okay.
So there's the stylistically, there's kind of a carry-through and
A continuity.
a continuity, yeah.
And the map was their idea.
And the map, and then also they added something to the hall that is completely new.
Stairway.
Which is, before there was a separate foyer where the stairs were, and when you were inside the hall, it wasn't easy to see how to get between the 2 floors. And so their idea was to put in a new, we call it a grand staircase. So from the floor map, there's then this grand staircase going up to the mezzanine level of the hall.
Yeah, and it looks proper. It looks as though it could have been there from the beginning, but in fact, it's a brand new feature.
That is Glenn Mason's work. That it looks like it.
Yeah.
It fits.
And
yeah,
we
it's cool.
And we
Very
had to.
nice.
We had to go through some acceptance of that when it was first proposed. I think all of us on the committee were a little bit. Yeah, this is.
You were.
Too much of a change, you thought?
Too much of a change.
I liked it.
I came to like it.
It makes a redundant staircase. There are now 2 staircases, which you need for fire exits.
Exactly.
As well. So it has a functional.
But I think
we had to have a staircase.
It sounds very grand, actually.
It's really nice. It's really nice.
It's great for rentals. If you want to have a grand entrance.
Yeah, exactly. You can come down the grand stairway, but it also, one of the problems with Pacific Hall used to be that it was really much a dead end. You had one way in and one way out. It felt stuffy. It felt sort of claustrophobic, like I really don't want to go in here. And the renovations over these last years have now opened it up tremendously. It is very inviting now.
Well, it's connected to the atrium.
Right. There's an atrium court that in between, so that we now have 3 different ways you can come into the hall, which means it's hard to structure traffic flow because you really don't know how people will be moving through the space.
But it does sound as though they can move through the space and that they will want to move through the space, which is very nice.
Yeah, and
also serves as a great connector to Hawaiian Hall in terms of content.
Yep.
Because you have the origins in one place, and then you have the culture, one of the last cultures to develop in the.
So if you go from Pacific Hall, you see where the Polynesians who then became Hawaiians came from. You go to Hawaiian Hall and you see the full fruition of what became Hawaiian culture.
Or
and
the
then
other way.
The atrium we use as the voyaging story.
Mm-hmm.
So we have our.
So everything hangs together now.
Model canoes and then. The banners and.
Yeah.
Now, was it originally planned that way? Because that sounds simply wonderful.
It was kind of, it was. Uh-huh.
A lot of stuff fell into place, though, as the process continued.
Generally, it was planned that way. In terms of the content, it was planned from the very beginning, harking back to the Bishop Museum's role in the Pacific as a research institution, that the reason for the research at the beginning was to discover where Hawaiians came from, to discover where Polynesians even came from. And so archaeology became a very important part of the story. So after some discussions there, we ended up by dividing up the archaeological story, where Hawaiians came from, and ultimately where the Pacific Islanders came from the general Pacific culture story. So we have archaeology on the mezzanine, and then the general Pacific story on the bottom, the main floor.
And of course, backing it up off to the side in that general area is the planetarium, which talks about the voyages.
Right, yeah. So we have been able to integrate pretty well the science and the culture and the stories and historical information into various presentations throughout the campus.
Is the whole purpose actually of all of this incredibly complicated work, which hasn't ended yet by any means, when it's brought to fruition, it's going to really amalgamate everything that the museum has been or ever will be. In a way, it will
Pretty
be
much.
I view it as our core. We're finally. I've been at the museum now for almost 40 years, and I'm very pleased that finally, when we get done with this renovation, our core story will be there, so that we can then do outreach and changing exhibitions and stuff, knowing that we have a solid foundation we're building on. Because when we first did dinosaurs back when you were there, Judy, back in the 1980s, it felt funny to me to be doing dinosaurs when we didn't have our core story told properly. But now finally our core story will be in good shape.
Well, not only that, but we didn't even have a hall to put them in, as you recall.
Yeah. Yes. We put them in a tent in the parking lot.
On a parking lot.
Yes.
So that I remember looking at that and thinking, the museum really needs to make some changes.
And it did.
Yes, it did.
It has been.
And it has done it in such a lot of institutions bring in a lot of outsiders to oversee things like this. And I think one of the things that has impressed me most was that you are the people
Well, we had Ralph Applebaum, as Betty was saying, it was very instrumental in getting the thing to work.
Yeah.
But we also have had a lot of help from the community outside, and not only the local, the cultural communities, but different kinds, scholars and people who specialize in natural sciences, etc. So they're very influential. I mean, we changed our exhibit stories in Hawaiian Hall because of what we were told by outsiders after we had already put our plans in place.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah, we changed them.
Yeah. And
can you go into any detail about that?
Oh, it takes a lot of time.
You can talk about like the moon phase story.
Yeah.
That's actually
okay.
Well,
but in Hawaii and Pacific Hall, I think there was one thing that really affected. I don't know how much you guys got affected, but having to do the proposals and stuff, I got really affected by it. And these were papers that were written by students of a Pacific Island Studies class that was run by Vilsoni Hereniko. And they didn't purposely send us these papers. We asked for help in what would you like? Could you help us with some of these? And so we got hold of these papers. They were so bad. They were so damning.
No, they were critical of the museum.
So critical of us.
Really?
It was amazing, and it was great because they were right on. They said exactly what we all felt, but because, people from outside have a stronger voice than people from inside you. So this was the case, and I think it really made a difference in how we approached, especially the first floor.
That sounds so healthy, if that's the right word.
Well,
it just sounds incredibly healthy.
The story is told from inside the culture looking out. It's not
in Hawaiian Hall.
In Hawaiian Hall, that's
but in
true.
Pacific Hall,
it's more the archaeology.
We don't have an insider really.
Yeah.
So yes, Hawaiians are Polynesians, but there are so many Pacific Islanders, so many cultures, so much diversity. It was too hard. But there are some scholars, some main scholars, and they get quoted liberally. And you will also see them in the video. I mean, the life and the humor, the values are incredible.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, there's someone who's not with us right now, Noelle Kahanu, and she's also been extremely important in bringing in outside people, as well as one of the things that she's always advocated for that's really been successful, the inclusion of contemporary or modern art by Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders.
That's important.
And that's going to be a feature. It's in Hawaiian Hall, and it's really going to be a feature in Pacific Hall as well. Things created by Pacific Islanders from other places, their own way of telling their own story through art. And you'll see that too.
But they just finished a mural.
Yeah,
you have to do your station break.
I have to do my station break. I was putting my fingers up, and every time somebody starts saying something so fascinating, let me do it quickly. This is Hawaii Public Radio. The program is The Business of the Arts. I'm Judy Neal, and if you haven't already guessed, our program today is on Bishop Museum. And we have DeSoto Brown, historian, Elizabeth Tatar, Director of Strategic Initiatives, and Dave Kemble, the Senior Exhibit Designer. And the real focus today is on the renovation of Pacific Hall. But obviously, as we've gotten into it, everything is united. You may be doing it one space at a time, but there's an entire vision of this, a unity of purpose that's obviously coming to the fore at this point.
Yep.
Yeah, and again, as I said earlier, it's been an evolutionary process because we've all learned and we've all made changes. We've all gone in different directions, and the process of itself has been, a major step forward in every way to just re-examine. Okay, what do we want to say here? How are we going to say it? But Betty started to say we've one of the big features that we've just worked on for Pacific Hall is a mural that was a cooperative artistic endeavor.
Well, it's not really. They're Hawaiians. They're all Hawaiians. They're well-known artists, but they included like 30 kids, 30 teenagers.
Where are they?
And
where's the
mural will be in Pacific Hall, right on top of this grand staircase.
It's a focal point as you come up the stairs. You see this giant mural on the wall on the mezzanine level.
Yeah, and it was led by local artist Meliana Meyer. And the artists that participated were Al Laganero, Solomon Enos, Harinani Orme, Kahi Ching.
I'm so impressed she's doing this
know.
by memory.
Yeah.
I think I've got them all.
I think you do.
Yeah, and
students.
it's a beautiful piece. They just finished it. It's 3-dimensional in that it's carved in layers, so it sticks out a bit, though it's going to be against the wall. It talks to the origins of Polynesia and almost to the Pacific Islands itself. It has to do with legends. It has to do with an octopus. And it has to do with coral. So there's a lot of stories in there. I have to really study it, because the more you look at it, the more things you see.
A lot of elements.
It's a lot of stuff. It's very beautiful.
Yeah,
And it's bas relief.
Yeah.
Well, not really.
layered.
It's wood. It's layered wood. It goes forward. It's carved.
But it also
And then
has...
painted.
It isn't in a rectangle. It has an organic,
Right.
waviness
to it.
But it's longer
Yeah.
than it is higher.
Well, that we want it to sound intriguing, so people will want to come to see it.
Well, you certainly got me wondering.
Good.
Another major feature in the new hall is going to be a giant screen hanging in the middle of the hall is 35 feet wide and 6 feet high hanging, and so on one side it has a continuous seamed wide expanse landscape thing to help tell. A basic theme is blue continent, that the ocean linked people instead of being a barrier. It was what linked the different island groups. So that wide expanse of the sea sort of thing will be conveyed on that one side. The other side is going to be a montage of faces of islanders, and DeSoto could talk about that.
Yeah, we mentioned earlier the inclusion of audiovisual elements.
Yeah.
And this screen is going to be one of the major features. There's a very big projection screen also in Hawaiian Hall, and the screen that Dave mentioned will be something that will certainly draw your attention as you walk in. And the one side that you'll see, we refer to the A side. That's the one that will be getting across the idea of the expanse. But on the other side, we are going to be showing 3 separate screens that are as montages of faces of Pacific Island people, and most of those pictures are historic ones that come from the Bishop Museum's collection. And that was something I was really happy to do, because again, this immense collection of historic photos that rarely are seen are so beautiful. So my intent was to get across as many different people as possible in age and gender and location. So you'll see these changing faces of all these different locations with some more contemporary color pictures integrated too, to get across the idea that it's not all historic, it's today as well. So this is the array of people whose material objects you'll see on the first floor in the cases Betty was describing. And then when you come to the second floor, the mezzanine, where you'll see these faces, you're going to be seeing the story that archaeology or other scientific endeavors tell us about this story of the Pacific people. And where did everybody come from, and how did they travel, and what did they take with them, and what are their similarities and what are their differences. And we, of course, can't tell the full story, but we certainly hope to get a lot of that across to people, diversity as well as coherence and similarities.
Betty, when we talked about what might happen in the long run, what is your overall goal? Is there a specific vision that you have? I mean, I know that you've told me that Pacific Hall will open in September, and I'm sure people are sitting there going, when can we see this place? September. We don't have a date yet, though. Is there a grand plan? Is there some kind of final goal that you're after? Or do you see this as a steady, ongoing kind of stream of development?
Well, our board and our director have been talking about this ever since they got their strategic plan in place a couple of years ago. And they've begun the process of an interpretive master plan. And within that plan, we're not only just talking about physical spaces, but also program, which means what is Bishop Museum? What is it going to do? Why are we here? Who are we doing it for? And how best do we get this across to people in such a way that we make the best use of our campus? So with these big, grand questions...
Yeah, they are.
We have the same characters involved. It's Glenn Mason and Ralph Applebaum Associates, and then, of course, our leadership. So we just finished our first phase, which is kind of a draft master plan where we laid out a program and we laid out our campus. So in terms of campus, which is our what's next and which is going to be part of our capital campaign again, it really is about trying to integrate our strengths, our story, the story of our research, the way we interpret things for our community. So it's natural science and it's cultures of the Pacific, and it's making use of our historic buildings. And yes, Bishop Hall is really there. It has to be renovated because the longer we take, the harder it's going to get, right? And we also are looking at a new collections building because we want to tie that circle, that grand circle that has the Hawaiian Hall complex, the entry experiences, science building, and into a natural science building exhibit. A brand new one, a beautiful one. And to do that, we need to move collections from our older building, that Butler building, that temporary building by the freeway. We need to move it to another space. So we're looking at that too. And then we're looking at a whole new entry experience that will include a lot of the protocol that's traditional, and plantings and landscape and just everything, right?
Wow.
It's a big, big project.
So you're going to dig a moat and have a drawbridge and the gift shops right off the...
Sort of like that.
No, not exactly.
Not at all.
Not exactly. But it is, I think...
but that's very exciting. That's...
Yeah.
That's
well, one of the
grand.
things that Betty just touched on was natural history. We haven't talked about that very much in this program, but because we've been talking about cultural history, people-related things. But our natural history collections are outstanding.
Yes, they are.
And they are, at this point, I think a lot of people don't realize they're there. And it's partly because they don't have a chance to see them. So
so many of your collections... What is it? It's like the tip of an iceberg,
Yes.
the museum, because they
Yes.
got like 92% of the collections are invisible.
But that's true of all museums. You can't exhibit everything.
Well, for natural history.
Natural History Museum.
Yeah, but cultural too. You don't always have, you always, if you're a real museum.
They don't tend to be as big a percentage.
Exactly. Yeah. But most of your stuff is not on exhibit. And
If
so
you have vials of mites, they're not going to be out on the
No, little microscopic insects, no, we're not going to show a lot of those. Although they could fit in a small area.
Or snails.
Snails, yes. Well, no, snail I mean,
We have a
you're
shell
joking
collection.
about that, but that Hawaiian land snails were...
Oh, I know. I've seen the collection.
Were outstandingly beautiful.
Yeah.
And they're rare.
And they're rare and extinct now.
Yeah. And, I was actually speaking from the heart.
Yeah, that's
they
for real.
They are so beautiful.
Right.
There are so many places. You're not going to dig in the middle of the Grand Lawn, are you?
No way. But
we're building around the Great Lawn. It's a focal point.
Yeah.
Anyway, what I was going to say is that one of our big goals was to really show more of our collections.
Yeah.
And to really show more of the natural science collections.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll be working towards with the plan that Betty just mentioned.
But it has to be interpreted. There has to be a story there.
Right.
It can't just be,
Right.
Is that already being formed?
No, not yet. No story yet.
We got to get Pacific Hall open first.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's our major.
Now
major
let's talk.
goal.
We only have about 4 or 3 minutes left. You had mentioned just before we began taping that the Pacific Hall was going to open in September. Is there a date set at all?
Yeah, there are I think 4 3 or 4 days that are devoted to it. It opens to the public on the 21st.
Of September?
Yes.
Okay.
And the 3 or 4 days prior to that are devoted to special openings.
The soft openings.
It's sort of,
donor openings.
Yeah.
And members.
But that's very important.
Yeah.
And so you'll have a series.
Membership has their own opening.
Yeah.
Sure. And I have a feeling it's going to be very crowded.
I think so.
Hopefully.
But in a nice way.
Oh, in the best possible way.
And then if it's too crowded, you have to come back. And we like that.
Now, everything else that we've thought of that's always been there is still there, like the gift shop.
Yep.
And a little restaurant.
Yes. And a planetarium.
And the planetarium.
Right.
Which just got renovated.
Yeah. It got renovated, but through state, thanks to the state.
Right. And we did a program on that.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying we've had this series of programs over the last 4 or 5 years, following the course of a lot of these things. But what you're working on is to me the sort of ne plus ultra of that's really exciting.
Well, we're excited too. But as I said, it's exciting, and it's also going to feel incredibly satisfactory to have completed so much of what we've done. And you cannot help but look at it when it's all over with and just feel not only relief but pride, because now the Hawaiian Hall complex, we were talking beforehand of how shabby it got because of just the inability of the museum to keep it up. And that shabbiness is gone. And what we have now is outstanding in the entire world. It's not just outstanding here. It is.
But one thing that, I have to throw a little cold water on this is that in order to sustain these exhibits, we have to remember they'll become stale really soon.
Yes, they will.
So we have to build in a renovation, a sustainability factor.
Yes. Yep. And that was one of the problems with the museum in the past, was that it didn't change in the distant past. It didn't change its exhibits. It didn't get people to come in, didn't keep things up. And that's a burden that we still have.
We've run out of time. And I had all these questions I haven't asked yet. Maybe we can get you back as we get closer towards September.
Okay.
And maybe have a real sort of a seance around the table of what's going on there. But I'd like to thank all three of you for taking this hour and being with us. You have been listening to DeSoto Brown historian, Elizabeth Tatar, Director of Strategic Initiatives, and Dave Kemble, Senior Exhibit Designer, and the people who are in charge of this renovation of Pacific Hall. It sounds like an incredibly exciting project. One of the things I am really, really impressed by is how well you seem to have worked as a team. You're all so equally excited about this. And it's not what you usually do. Well, except for David, of course, Dave with your exhibits. But it is a little far away from what you normally have done, and it sounds so energizing.
Well, yes, we'll leave it at that. It's been energizing. It's been tiring. It was not without some friction sometimes, but on the whole, we've worked well.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for listening. This has been Bishop Museum. It has been the Business of the Arts on Hawaii Public Radio. My name is Judy Neal. Our engineer is Jason Taglianetti. Our executive producer, talk shows, is Beth Ann Kozlovich. I'd also like to say a special thank you today to Brooke Wilson, who helped me put this show together. Thanks, Brooke. And thank you for listening. Aloha.